Welcome to this calf rearing full performance webinar brought to you by NZAgbiz, presented by Dr Sue McCord from AgResearch and Michael Shallcrass from Fonterra. Mike is a veterinary program manager with an extensive background in veterinary science. Mike is passionate about identifying and promoting the best farming practices across New Zealand, working closely with Kiwi farmers to ensure sustainable and successful outcomes for their herds. Sue is a senior scientist at AgResearch, who has spent much of her career researching livestock rearing, survival and nutrition for animals raised for the meat and dairy industries. Sue is passionate about sharing this expertise to empower farmers and drive innovation in animal care and nutrition.
Next section, we're going to be talking about diet transitions. So we've talked about the importance of feeding milk and feeding solid feeds. And we just want to go through a few of the basics around how we manage the transitions between different types of diets. It's important for us to remember in nature, the calf is fed by its mum. It usually has free access to milk, or as much milk as mum will let it have. Learns its foraging skills from its mum, and they get all their essential nutrients for growth through the milk and the forage that they're consuming when they're with their mum. And they're gradually weaned to be able to utilise that forage, and often weaned at a later age than what we do in our artificial systems. In our commercial calf rearing systems, however, and there's a wide range of systems that we employ to do a good job of looking after those calves when they're separated from their mums. But those calves actually go through a lot of different transitions, and it's not always a diet transition. There is the transition through separation from their mum, when they're taken out of the paddock and popped into a rearing facility. Often they're put indoors, and usually, at least for the first few days or few weeks, they will stay indoors or in an outdoor paddock where they don't have mum available. These calves will often be transported multiple times. On your dairy farms, unlikely to be transported a lot, but in dairy beef systems, calves can be transported quite a long way. Often we're feeding systems where we're restricting the amount of milk that we've talked about, and sometimes we're limiting their access to forage. We have different ages at weaning, depending on what system's being used. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's later. And then we also have the weaning off their starter diets. So all of these things are transitions and are things that can put stress on our young calf. And so what we want to try and do in our rearing system is to find ways that we can minimize that stress to be able to help that calf cope with those transitions and to survive and thrive. So the key principles behind our weaning transitions is to be able to minimize stress. So that's nutritional and environmental stress. So as we've talked about with weaning off the different diets, change one thing at a time. Try and reduce that stress by not overloading the calf in terms of all those different things that we might be wanting to do to them. Change diets slowly, preferably over about 3 weeks if we can. And we've talked when we were in the solid feed section about monitoring how much solid feed the calves are consuming. We want to make sure that they're getting good quality feeds, but also not changing the formulation of feeds while we're trying to get that calf to go through a diet transition, because they'll be trying to figure out how to cope with one type of diet versus another type of diet. But if we give them a poorer quality diet at the same time, that's going to cause stress. And just giving them plenty of space to be able to get access to the feed that we're feeding them. So whether that be pasture in a paddock or headspace at a feeder is really important.
So as Sue said before, when a calf's feeding off her mum in nature, she probably eats or drinks 8 to 12 times a day, little and often. In an artificial system, we probably don't have the labour workforce to be able to do that for the calves. So we're looking at making a compromise here. Now, the majority of dairy farmers are feeding calves twice a day, or young calves in particular, but there's still a percentage who aren't, and in the dairy beef situation, it's reasonably common for calves to be fed once a day. Now, really young calves can't actually get enough nutrients within one feed because their abomasum is too small to really meet their requirements and thrive. You know, they'll probably stay alive and they'll probably nibble a bit of meal, but it won't have a big contribution, and they will grow, as we've seen. That fast growth rate happens in those early days, and so the more milk you can get into them, the better they're going to do. But because the abomasum is small, you can't do it in one feed. So to get the most out of the calf's potential, you need to be feeding them at least twice a day. I hesitate to bring it up because of how long the process has been going on for, but the code of welfare for dairy calf rearing is being reviewed at the moment by MPI, and it looks like it's probably going to become a legal requirement to feed very young calves at least twice a day. But we're kind of still waiting on the political process to go through there. After that first kind of 3 to 4 weeks of age, that's when they are starting to get some more nutrient from non-milk feeds, but also where their stomach is growing to the point that they can accommodate more milk, to the point that they are able to thrive even when fed once a day. So once they're about a month old, that's when you can start thinking about transitioning to once a day if that's necessary, given your labour constraints. But don't do it suddenly. Try and make it gradual. As Sue said before, that it's about changing as few things as possible to still get to where you need to be. So don't just go cold turkey. Here's all your milk in one go. Look at increasing the size of one of the feeds and decreasing the other one over time, and don't combine stresses at the same time, because that's when you're more likely to see negative impacts on the calf's growth and health. When you're changing between feed types, same principles apply. Go slowly. It's reasonably common to see people start on a high protein meal, for example, and then transition to a lower protein meal as the calves get bigger. If you're going to do that, do it slowly. All of these changes, the rumen doesn't get bored. It likes to be fed the same thing at the same time, consistent. And so any changes that you make, try and do them kind of as slowly as you can, because if you get too rapid a change, then that's when you might see a digestive upset of some description. And particularly that weaning off of the meal, if there hasn't been a good exposure to pasture and forages, then you may see a reasonably significant growth check there. So I guess it's planning in advance and actually going, how well are these animals transitioning onto forage, and can we afford to do it yet, or do we need to delay for a bit longer, or do we need to just do it a bit more slowly? That's what you should be looking at. Look at the animal, because they will tell you how they're feeling about things. So don't be afraid to make changes slowly and make them go backwards if you need to. Like if you start reducing meal and you don't think that they're actually ready for that, add some more meal back in and give them a little bit more time. Because you don't want to end up in a situation where you've put all this great work into their kind of milk feeding period and you start weaning them off and things go backwards. And then I guess this is a really significant transition, is that movement from a calf rearer through to a grazier. And I think there is a risk here that it is reasonably common to combine a bunch of different management activities all together at the same time. And that's where ideally you have a conversation between the people. That's the importance of communication here. What are everyone's expectations? What is the grazier prepared to continue feeding them? Like, are they prepared to keep feeding meal? In some situations that's useful. If those calves are not really well transitioned onto forage yet, then actually keeping meal within the system on both properties can smooth that transition. If the calves are really already, well weaned off meal and are eating forage happily, then you may not need to do that. So it's just being really clear about who's expected to do what and when, and kind of clearly communicate, okay, this is the stage that these calves are at. Are you ready to receive them then? And as we've got highlighted here, don't send them if they're not ready.
And as we've said before, with our milk and our solid feeding systems, you can't improve what you don't measure. So think about what you can measure in your calves to be able to monitor whether a calf is coping with a transition. Whether that be a diet transition or an environmental transition. The calf will tell you. Monitor their behaviour and how they're looking. Monitor feed intake if you can. Monitor growth with a live weight or a weigh tape. That's a really good indicator as to whether the system is working well. Do they look nice and rounded and in good body condition? Got a bit of fat on them. Are they nice and healthy, and are they ruminating well? And particularly if we're looking at the transition between diets, a change in rumination and a change in behaviour are often some of the very early indicators that things are not going well. If they're looking a little bit dull and lethargic, they're just sitting around, not really expressing their normal play behaviours, you're not seeing them ruminating, that is often an early indicator that something's not quite going right, and that we need to have a look a little bit further as to what's going on there. So it's really about that observation, measure it, monitor it, to be able to support those transitions for your young calves, so that they can grow up and be a thriving and healthy member of your future herd.